So once again, 4 o'clock has come around. So please feel free to ask your questions if there are any doubts in the room. Yes, please.
นมัสการพระอาจารย์ค่ะ In the morning we do the morning chanting, homage to the Sangha, right? In the chanting it refers to 4 noble pairs and 8 individuals. Just wonder.
The 4 pairs, the 8 kinds of noble beings.
Yes. Just would like to know who they are.
Yes. You're not the first person to ask that question. What it refers to is the 4 stages of enlightenment, and for each stage there is being on the path, and then there is realizing the fruit, the magga and phala. So first stage is sodapan, stream entry. Second stage is sakadagami, is the once returner. The third stage is anagami, non-returner, and 4th stage is arahant. So the 4 pairs are those beings who are on the path to sotapanna and who have realized the fruit of sotapanna. And the second pair is on those on the path to sakadagami and those who have realized the fruit of sakadagami. And the third pair is on the path to anagami and then having realized the fruit of anagami. And then the 4th pair is those on the path to arahantship and who've realized the fruit of arahantship. So the Sangha, which is the refuge in the external form, is those beings who have awakened to Dhamma. So in that respect, that could include lay people as well as monastics. And not every Sotapanna Anagami is a monastic. So the Arya Sangha is those beings who have awakened to those particular levels of reality.
Could you please give me some idea about the Buddha image at the back?
Oh, I have to ask Mamta.
Okay.
Asking about the Buddha image behind us.
Yeah, and the posture.
I think this was specifically chosen and crafted by Mamta, so she can explain her choice of the Buddha image and the mudra.
I got this from Buriram. It's a black stone. It's called Patoma Tetsana. Patoma Tetsana.
So the mudra is that of the giving a Dhamma teaching. So it varies from image to image, but if you look closely, the Buddha is holding the last finger joint. Sometimes it's just the first finger. This one is the little finger, and so my understanding is that where he's sort of holding that one finger joint, he's saying, just like when he picked up a handful of leaves from the floor of the forest, what I know is comparable to all the leaves in the forest. What I teach you is just this handful of leaves, dukkha, samudaya, nirodha, magga, the dukkha, the origin, cessation, and the path leading to the cessation of dukkha. And similarly, the holding of the one finger joint is, it was explained to me, it means it's just this much. That's all you need to know. This is all the information you need, just a little bit, not the whole body, just one finger joint. That's as much as you need. Just these fundamental teachings on the middle way, the 4 Noble Truths, and then as we've been mentioning, and also in the chanting, the Dhammacakka Sutta, the Anattalakkana Sutta, the reason why we recite these or that we study these is because they contain so much of that the essential information in that one finger joint. Some other monks might explain it differently, but that's how I understand it to mean. ก็คืออธิบายก็เมื่อมีมุตราอย่างนี้ก็พระพุทธเจ้าจะเป็นนี่เป็นคำสอนของพระพุทธเจ้าก็สักนิดเดียวความสิ่งที่สมเด็จสัมพุทธเจ้ารู้ก็เหมือนกันร่างกายแต่ที่สิ่งที่พูดเป็นสักนิดเดียวใช่ไหม
มันกับเป็นในยุคนั้นอย่างเราจะเห็นพระพิฆเนศอะไรก็ทำมือลักษณะนี้เยอะอยู่
นิมนต์
ครับก็มันเหมือนเป็นศิลปะช่วงนั้นด้วยแล้วก็ถ้าเกิดเราได้เห็นรูปปั้นอินดูทางฮินดูก็จะมีลักษณะทำมือแบบนี้เทพเจ้าทำมือแบบนี้เยอะเป็นลักษณะเหมือนการสอนการบอกอาจจะมาจำไม่ได้จริงๆแต่มันมีความหมายอยู่แต่ละนิ้วทั้งหมดมันมีความหมายอยู่เดี๋ยวจะลองไปหาข้อมูลมาให้แต่จะเป็นความเชื่อของยุคนั้นถ้าเกิดเราน่าจะเคยเห็นพระพิฆเนศปางแบบนี้ก็มีที่ทำมือลักษณะนี้มีแล้วก็เนี่ยเทพเจ้าหลายๆองค์ของทางฮินดูจะทำมือลักษณะนี้ที่เป็นปางหน้าตลาดพระนารายณ์เต้นที่เป็นยกขายกมือเหมือนฟ้อนก็จะมีมือลักษณะนี้เช่นกันจะมือเหมือนกันเลยเป็นเดี๋ยวจะหาข้อมูลมาให้ว่าหมายความว่าอะไร
So you can make your own interpretation. Yes, the back there.
Could you elaborate more on Sankhara Pachaya Vinyan?
Sankhara Pachaya Vijnana.
In Paticcasamuppada.
In the Paticcasamuppada.
Yeah,
so, as I said, I think last night, when I first came across the teaching of dependent origination, that whole first few links, Avijja Pachaya Sankhara, Sankhara Pachaya Vijnana, Vijnana Pachaya Namarupa, it was very mysterious. Like, what is this talking about? Because the language was unusual in English as well. So it took a long time to even get a bit of a feeling for what that's talking about. So my understanding is that in terms of the dependent origination cycle describing the experience of each moment, what you have in that, the first section, Avijja Pachaya Sankhara, Sankhara Pachaya Vijnana, Vijnana Pachaya Namarupa, Namarupa Pachaya Salayatanang. In the first section, it's describing how when there is a lack of sati, when there's a lack of mindfulness, when there's avijja, then the mind starts to create the subject-object division. So sankhara, in this respect, it means that which is compounded or separate, that which is put together. So that kind of a basic division. So as soon as there's ignorance, then there starts to be a me here and a world there, and then that conditions it conditions vijnana and namarupa together. Again, they're kind of and in a number of teachings, there's a famous teaching of the Buddha where he says, Vijnana and Namarupa, they lean on each other like two bundles of reeds. They support each other. So it's not like the one, you get first Vijnana and then Namarupa, but rather they are mutually supportive. And so that if you can follow that. So they kind of, from Sankhara, they kind of both arise and then they work together. And in actually the most, the longest discourse about dependent origination, called the Mahanidana Sutta in the long discourses, the Digha Nikaya, when the Buddha is describing the whole process, he traces it back from dukkha and Sokapari Deva to birth and becoming, upadana, the clinging, craving, feeling, sense contact, 6 senses, and then he says, and what conditions are 6 senses? Namarupa. What conditions Namarupa? Vijnana. What conditions Vijnana? Namarupa. So it turns back upon itself. So in that teaching, he doesn't mention sankhara and avijja at all, and that's the kind of the longest discourse about dependent origination. So what you can see that is happening is that as the mind starts to become unmindful, so switches off, then the sense of a subject and experiencer and the world then starts to form, and then that gathers strength in Namarupa and Vijnana kind of leaning on each other. There's a very wise monk from Sri Lanka called Venerable Jnanananda, and he says it's like a whirlpool, like a vortex, that Namarupa and Vijnana, they kind of strengthen each other until, and it all happens very, very quickly, but they strengthen each other. So then the Vijnana side of it becomes the subject, like I am experiencing, and the Namarupa is the 5 khandhas of I am experiencing the world. There's a me here and a world there. And the world can also be the inner world of a thought or a memory, as well as a perception of a building or people. But that Namarupa Vijnana vortex, so it's kind of setting up the self, other, me, and the world duality. And then the next one on the list is Salayatana, the 6 senses. So that's describing how then the attention latches on to a particular sense, hearing, seeing, feeling, whatever that might be. And then that leads to contact, passa, vedana, tanha, upadana, bhava. So in terms of sankhara conditioning vijnana, I say it's more helpful to understand it's like sankhara conditioning vijnana and namarupa together, and then they kind of work as a sort of combination. They lean on each other, the 2 bundles of reeds. And in that sutta, the bundles of reeds sutta, which is in the connected discourses, the Samyutta Nikaya, it's in the Nidana, the connected discourses are about Paticcasamuppada, the Nidana Vagga. So on causation, the Buddha says if you take away the vijnana, then the namarupa collapses. If you take away the namarupa, the vijnana collapses. They lean on each other, they support each other, they feed each other. So these are areas to kind of look at in your own mind. As I said, I spent several years, I mean, not all the time, there's other things going on, but so trying to get a feeling for what these terms meant and then how it worked together. But I did find in particular Venerable Jnanananda's description very, very helpful. And there's a book of his called The Magic of the Mind, where he talks about that in some detail.
Thank you.
The Namarupa Vijnana Vortex. Sounds like a rock band, but
Thank you very much.
or a Buddhist rock band. Yes.
กราบนมัสการพระอาจารย์ค่ะ in physical exercise when we reach our comfort zone
When we reach what?
our comfort zone, comfort, like
Comfort zone.
yeah,
Okay.
comfort zone, we lift heavier weights to make the muscles grow bigger. What about meditation? What do one do to further our practice to keep it challenging?
Sit for longer periods of time. Go on more retreats, listen to more Dhamma talks, keep precepts more strictly, all kinds of things. There's many, many ways we can up the ante. The Dhutanga practices are also available for lay people. Just eating once a day, You can do that. And simplifying your life in terms of possessions, in terms of engagement with social media, many things. So, but the in terms of classical training, the 13 Dhutanga practices, ways of raising the game, as it were, because they focus on things like food, sleep, comfort, and shelter. These are kind of non-conceptual areas of the brain, the kind of reptile brain territory, and so they're challenging the mind's sense of reactivity. So I'm not recommending that this is for all lay people, but just they are there, and they are helpful standards you can work with. So like one of the Dhutangas that I've practiced in the past is just living on the food that's put in your alms bowl as you walk through the village, and having nothing else during the day. That's your food for the day, is whatever lands in your bowl. And when the Sangha members go out on Bindabat to the town in most monasteries, certainly at Amaravati, then that's the practice they keep. So they'll walk into Berkhamsted or Hemel Hempstead or Tring, and then whatever is put into their bowl by any strangers, we don't arrange anything. There's no kind of schedule, but they're just standing on the street. So that's the food they have for the day. And if they get a lot, then they have plenty to eat. If they don't get much, then they don't have much to eat. So that challenges one's instinctual relationship to wanting to have a good guaranteed food supply. So eating just once a day, either then strictly no breakfast, no other meals, just eating one time a day. And then with sleep, keeping the practice of not lying down to sleep, so only using 3 postures: sitting, standing, and walking. So that's interesting. So I did that for about 3.5 years. I just found out Ajahn Chaisai did it for 4 years. So we have to compare notes on that. After a while, no posture is comfortable. Everything aches, and you're always tired. So again, it's not to be torturing yourself. The Buddha very specifically crafted these ascetic practices to be things that weren't destructive, but they challenged. There's powerful instincts around sleep, food, also your sense of shelter or having your own space. So one of the Dhutangas is just living under a tree, so not using a building to stay in. Probably difficult to work in lay life, but that's why when we go traveling, we have a glot or a tent, and just sort of have a mosquito net hanging from a tree or a book tent, a tent to sleep in. So it's ways of challenging those reptile brain functions around comfort, personal space, food, sleep, all those non-conceptual reactive areas, to kind of edge into those. So you can think creatively how in your own life you can challenge those assumptions about what I need to have around, what is taken for granted as being essential, and challenging that just in a sensible, kind of skillful way. And it's powerful, because I've known people who are extremely dedicated Buddhist practitioners, notable Buddhist teachers who published Dhamma books, and then put in a situation where they're slightly outside their comfort zone. Like I remember I was at a conference in Dharamsala. It was March, so the end of winter, beginning of spring. It's kind of gray and drizzly, cold. And all of the attendees of this conference for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, we were staying in this hotel. And then the hotel manager said, "I'm sorry, there's no electricity." And then one of my esteemed fellow Dhamma teachers said, "But my clothes are all wet. I need to dry my clothes. I need a clothes dryer. And then the manager said, sorry, madam, there is no electricity. No, you don't understand. I need to dry my clothes. He said, well, you can hang them up in your room, but the room's cold and damp. That's what's available, madam. And I'm not trying to shame her, but she really had a hard time. She was really very distressed because she'd never lived in a situation where you didn't have electricity or you couldn't have dry clothes to put on. And so it was really, I found impactful, like, wow, this person's a Dhamma expert and an admired published author and much loved teacher, but with just, a bit of cold and damp and soggy clothes to wear, then there's no refuge was available at that time. Maybe things have changed since then, I hope so. But it was, if we are, say, very dedicated to our practice of Dhamma, but we've got very, very clear set of conditions that we keep in place. The way I like it, it's got to be this way. The food has got to be like this. The temperature has to be this. Then we are making our practice very dependent, very fragile. And the purpose of, say, and spending more time in meditation, listening to more Dhamma teachings, and using like these sort of Dhutanga standards is to develop an adaptability. So our practice is less and less dependent on physical conditions. So whether there's a lot of time or a little time, you're okay. Whether you're sick or you're healthy, you're okay. Whether you're comfortable or uncomfortable, you're okay. Whether your clothes are soggy or they're dry, you're okay. If you're on a crowded train or you're by yourself in a Dhamma hall, you're okay. So that I would say the maturity in the practice manifests as a great adaptability, that you don't have to have things any particular way in order to be completely at ease. And I feel that the Lord Buddha was a very good example in this respect. Yeah, he was born as a prince. He had a very luxurious lifestyle growing up. He had wealthy monarchs and rich people who were his supporters, but he still lived as a barefoot monk walking around living on alms food in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh for 45 years. And when there was a famine, then he ate bran. That was what was there was to eat. He could have probably magicked a lot of food into being, but he didn't. He chose to live very, very simply and adapt to the circumstances as he found them. So that I feel that's a very wonderful example. And in terms of strengthening our practice, it's not so much the depths of samadhi that is the sort of key measure, but I would say personally that sense of adaptability. You can be alone, you can be with people, you can be hungry, you can be full, you can have very few things, you can have an abundance, and all good.
To be content wherever you are.
Exactly.
Thank
Contented
you.
and easily satisfied. Sometimes for some monks, it's more difficult to be content with luxury than it is with simplicity. Some of us are very attached to our simplicity. I like patched robes, and sometimes I've had robes with like 4 layers of patches, and when they wanted to take my patched sabong away from me, like, no, it's mine. These are my rags. You're not going to take them away from me. And I realized, oh, this is attachment, attachment to my patched rags. A number of years ago, I was a very ardent ascetic, and I would always give any nice things that were given to me, I give them away, and so I had a bit of a kind of overzealous streak, shall we say? And one day at the mealtime at Amaravati, somebody had given Lumpur Sameto a very rich Danish pastry. so covered in the kind of sugary glaze and creme pâtissière and jam, and it was this kind of very kind of bright, colorful thing. And he put it in his bowl lid and he handed it to me, and I immediately sort of took it and passed it on. He said, "No, I want you to have it." And through my mind, I went, but Luang Por, I'm the monk that never accepts nice things. And he kind of gave me that look and said, that said, "I know, this is for you. Eat the pastry." So sometimes that it's not always attachment to comfort and richness. It can be attachment to simplicity and that which is what the mind has latched onto.
Thank you.
So, any other questions? Yes, over here.
กราบนมัสการค่ะ I like some advice on teaching children and teenager when they are at the stage where they're forming themselves, and are there any key message, for that to be the stepping stone for later on in life? They don't have faith yet at this stage, I guess.
Yes, yeah. Again, you're not the first person to ask that question. To be honest, I'm not an expert. I have spent a certain amount of time teaching like family summer camps and visiting schools, or working with school groups and younger people and so on. But there are many families come to the monasteries, and they're always asking about how to raise their children, or get their children, help their children to be interested in Buddha Dhamma and so on. And over time, I've come to the conclusion that it's really by example that we teach in the best way. So that if you want to teach your children Buddhist principles, when things go badly for you and you get upset, how do you handle it? When things go well and you get excited, how do you handle it? When there's good fortune, bad fortune, how do you handle it? And how do you speak about it? How do you hold it within yourself? And what do you manifest to the family? So that, and particularly younger children, they learn by example. And so if they see that, mum's really upset, but and so she's tearful, but she's not taking it out on us. That's good. So then they'll see, okay, yeah, mum's upset, but she's being patient with it, or that they've done something really bad. They've broken something, or they've told a lie, and they're afraid that you're going to get angry with them, and then rather than blowing up and getting angry, then you approach it in a different way. That you're still telling them it's not good to tell a lie, but they see, oh, I did something really bad, really wrong. I broke that valuable thing, and wow, your mum didn't get angry. She obviously, liked that vase that I broke. It's in pieces, but look at that. She didn't just blow up and get angry and scold me. So these kind of things make a big impact, and they communicate in ways, to some extent, much better than verbal explanations. It's like an object lesson. And so living by example, being a good example. I remember a few years ago, a couple of Thai women came to Amaravati and had their children with them. And one of the mothers said, "Oh, can you teach my daughter? She's Dhamma. She's really obstinate. She's 15 and she won't do anything I say. Yeah, she's really obstinate." And the girl was like plainly not particularly happy being talked about in that way. But anyway, so the mother spoke for a little bit, and then the daughter just turned to her and said, well, is it any surprise that I'm a bit obstinate? You know, because you're the one that causes so much difficulty in the family. You're out drinking every Friday night, every Saturday night. You know, what kind of example does that set? And I said, good point. So listen to her. And so oftentimes when families come and it's often the case that parents say, can you straighten out my son or my daughter, or make them obey me, or they're not very happy with their studies. It's often I'll be giving more attention to the parents and encouraging the parents and giving the same kind of advice that if you want your daughter to be well behaved, if you're going out partying every weekend, you're expecting too much. Not that you would, but just as an example. So that then, and like I was giving the example of my own parents, how they never argued in front of us. They sort of dealt with family issues without kind of fighting with each other, and also everything was very fair, so that there was equal shares, fair shares for all of us children, the 3 children. Everyone was treated completely equally. And so these kind of things are a subtle sort of teaching, but they're very significant. And that they do get through in a way, so that you can say to your kids, like, well, I want such and such. They say, well, you've already had one and your brother didn't get one yet. So it's really, he should get one first before you have extra. Isn't that fair? Kind of walk them through it. And that kind of being a good example, and also giving reasons why you're making the choices that you are, rather than just taking the high seat, saying it's that way because I say so, and you should obey me. Like, that doesn't usually have a very good effect. In terms of joining in with pujas or meditation, you really have to work it out individually, and because children will vary, and what works in the family home might be very, very different places. But I do feel that the main thing is being a good example. So they want to be like mom or dad. They admire you. They want to be like you because you're manifesting being a good-hearted, kind, careful, thoughtful person who's also fun to be with. And so that I feel is the best way of creating the ground for education. Again, I'm not an expert, but I feel that's these are important principles. Also, that one of the things that I'm not sure how it is here in Thailand, but in some families, the parents can be obsessed with academic achievement, and that have a lot of that. Basically, the child's job is to represent the parents and to sort of be fly the family flag, and it's like them as an individual is kind of lost altogether. And so that can be very challenging, because the value system of the parents can be like, you have to be a doctor, you have to be an engineer. There's no other possibility. And that can be very unfair on the children. I remember one family in the States that I knew very well, still know quite well. They lived in Michigan. I was on the West Coast, and so occasionally I'd be in that area giving some talks and retreats and such like. And so the mother of this family sort of wanted to sit down with me and say, I'm really concerned about my son. I think he's, we've taken him to a psychiatrist a few times. He's really got some very, very serious problems. And I thought, oh, this is sad to hear, that he's having some difficulties. And then again, I'm not trying to shame her, but as we talked, and I tried to get a sense of what his difficulties were. His great psychological difficulty was that he didn't want to be a doctor. He wanted to be a social worker. And I really wanted, I mean, I had to restrain myself. I thought, are you out of your tiny mind? What's wrong with being a social worker? He's a kind guy. That's what he's drawn to. What's wrong with being a social worker? It's a great livelihood, very wonderful service. I didn't, because I could see a certain aramana arising. But she was really concerned. But it's terrible. He doesn't want to be a doctor. And I thought, wow, she really means it. It's like, how awful that the other two children were already in medical school, so that they had a kind of medical family. And I thought, wow. So I tried to sort of ease it around, saying, well, he makes his own choices. I don't think he really needs to, I mean, it's up to you, but I don't really think he needs to see a psychiatrist. I wouldn't class this as mental illness. Trying to be polite and sincere, but, you make your own medical choices in your own families. It's not up to me as a monk. But the desire to be a social worker is not a mental illness, I would suggest, my amateur perspective. But it was the pressure was there from above. You should be doing this, and there's something wrong with you if you don't. So again, people make your own choices. It's up to you. You have your own family dynamics, or the businesses and such like. But I would suggest letting your children make their own choices, and if they have an inclination towards being a social worker or a journalist or an artist rather than a doctor or an engineer, fine. That people have their own skills, their own inspiration, and to force children into fulfilling a role that's just a kind of assumption of the parents, you've got to do this, it's the family business, or you've got to do this because what will our friends think if you don't go to medical school? Well, again, I could be a bit blasé about that. So, well, who cares what they think? But obviously these people do, and what the mysterious they think can have great power in people's lives. So again, as a monastic, I don't make people's choices for them, but in terms of education and providing an environment for the flourishing of young children, teenagers, giving at least some scope for their own particular interests, their own talents, and their own gifts, and that not forcing the children into a role or to act in and to follow courses of study and work that according to your own expectations, or again, going to my family, it didn't occur to me how embarrassing it was for my mother to have to, or my dad to, well, what's your boy up to these days? It didn't really occur to me till much later, like, oh yeah, that must have been quite hard for them. Because they're also so proud of you when you're growing up and passing exams and winning prizes and such like. Oh, my boy, he does this, he does that, he's the captain of the rugby team, and so on and so forth. And then suddenly, so that a certain adaptability in the parents in terms of expectations, a certain readiness to say, well, it's not what we expected or not what we were thinking of, but well, that's what she wants to do. She's keen to be a journalist. So, okay, so let's find a good journalism school and support them in that. Ajahn Jiew was a journalist before he was a bhikkhu, so I guess that's one of the reasons I'm thinking of that. So I hope some of that is helpful. Ajahn Jayasaro is the expert in the educational field. Yeah, please.
Krab Namaskaran ka. During the early session that you have taught this week, you mentioned about the teaching of Prajahn Sumeto about when we first attending the retreat, normally we concentrate only on our breath or on the footsteps. It means that we exclude others. And then when the mind comes to the peaceful stage, we should include others as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like you to elaborate a little bit more, because I try, but it seemed like is that we are going to do vipassana just to be aware of it and let go, or any other meaning behind that? Thank you very much.
Yes, good question. So the phrase that Luang Por would use is concentration, or one-pointed concentration, is the point which excludes. So your attention is on a single point and everything else is deliberately excluded. And then this kind of open awareness is the point which includes. So it's one-pointedness, but the point is very, very big, kind of very, very wide. So that kind of open awareness in and of itself, it's part of vipassana practice. But that open awareness doesn't necessarily involve so much of the quality of investigation, of pijarana. And an insight practice, vipassana, necessarily involves a degree of investigation, challenging the mind's habits of attitude, thinking that the impermanent is permanent, or thinking that what is not self is self, and what is unsatisfactory is satisfactory, and so on. So that the vipassana is, in a sense, you're using that wide open spaciousness, the open awareness, and within that space, then there's this particular kind of reflection, exploration, and challenging habits of mind is being carried out. That makes sense? Yeah.
I recall you mentioned about to include also other that at present at that time. So is that to be aware of what is going on, like any other sound, and let it just be aware and then let it go?
Yes. So that open awareness is like whatever perceptions take shape from the inner world, the outer world. So thoughts, emotions, memories, visual forms, sounds that we hear, physical sensations, just all of the changes of the experiential field. So you're not focusing on any individual object, like a person or a tree or a sound, but the effort is to sustain a non-specific open awareness. So the awareness isn't latching onto a particular object. And that takes quite a bit of work, because the instinct is to latch onto particular sounds or shapes or forms or ideas, so that's sustaining that quality of open awareness without focusing on a particular object. That's part of it. So that's all included. Other people and things are included within that awareness.
Thank you.
That makes sense?
Yeah, this morning I try something like that, and I feel like when you do that, you feel that you are part of the whole nature.
Mm-hmm.
You are not.
Are, yeah.
Yeah, I like you feel it. You
Yeah.
know, I think that is where your awareness is wider. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Yes, there's a hand up there.
Could you define perception and consciousness more clearly with an example? Because earlier you were explaining how vijnana and namarupa, they condition each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought vijnana is sense consciousness, and it has like concepts, ideas, thoughts. And I thought nama, which is name, should be part of vijnana. So I got all confused about that. So
Yeah,
could you explain that a little bit?
You are
you.
confused about that which is confusing. So your confusion is quite appropriate. Many books and doctoral theses have been written on these themes. So the short version is the vijnana that is the third link of the dependent origination is not quite the word is not used in quite the same way as vijnana as part of Namarupa. So the nama of Namarupa includes Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. So Namarupa is a shorthand way of talking about the five khandhas. So it's the same word, Vijnana, but it's got slightly different meanings in those two parts of the same process. So it is confusing. That's why I was saying earlier how it's very helpful to get a working sense of what all these different terms refer to from your own experience. So in terms of perception and consciousness of sanya and vijnana, so again, I was quoting this dialogue between, I think it's between the Arahant nun Dhammadina and her former husband Visakha. And Visakha asks her, feeling, perception, and consciousness, are they separate or are they connected? And she says, feeling, perception, and consciousness, so Vedana, Sanya, and Vijnana, they are conjoined, not disjoined, because that which we feel, we perceive, that which we perceive, we cognize. So you can't entirely separate them out from each other. When the third of the Buddha's discourses, called the Fire Sermon, the Adita Pariyaya Sutta, the Buddha uses the model of the six senses and raga, dosa, and moha, passion, aversion, and delusion as a sort of framework for that particular teaching. And for each of the six senses, he talks about the consciousness associated with each sense. So like the eye, chakku, and then there is chakku vijnana, eye consciousness, and then chakku sampasso, the contact that arises based on the eye, and so on. So there's eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose, tongue, body, mind consciousness. So they're all different kinds of vijnana, chakku vijnana, sota vijnana, gana vijnana, jiva vijnana, kaya vijnana, mano vijnana. So that the perceptual process also involves discriminative consciousness. That's why in that dialogue between Dhammadina and Visakha, then it's like they're conjoined, they're not disjoined. You can't really separate them out completely from each other. But the feeling is not exactly the same as the perception. Like I was giving the example of water, the wetness isn't the same as the flavor, or the temperature isn't the same as the viscosity, but they're all aspects of the same water. So that feeling, perception, and consciousness, in this respect, you can't completely separate them out from each other, but there's a certain way that they are distinct. So I don't know if that clarifies things or makes it more confusing, but literally I spent several years just trying to sit with these different concepts, and I would draw little diagrams and with boxes and arrows between them, trying to figure out, okay, this vijnana, how is it connected to that vijnana, and this sankara, the sankara that's the second one of the dependent origination, how's that connected to the sankara that's part of the nama in Namarupa? And so you can really get into a tangle if you're not careful. So I was very much helped by the way that Luang Por Sumedho, and the other morning I was talking about wise reflection and the use of investigation, how over 3 or 4 years for the winter retreat time in Amaravati, each year Ajahn Sumedho would just talk about dependent origination, and he'd take like one chunk, like avidya pachaya sankara, or salayatana pasa vedana, six senses, contact, feeling, and he would literally talk about those a couple of times a day for 2 or 3 weeks, just on one little area. So by the end of that time, you're hearing the words, you're taking them into the meditation, you're sitting with them, and by the end of those 3 or 4 years, it's like, okay, I think I'm beginning to get the picture. But it's very helpful just to take a small chunk of that whole process, to look at it, to feel it out, and what's clear, then to take that news out, and what's unclear, then say, well, that belongs on the mystery, in the mystery department at the moment, but we'll get there. We'll get there eventually. So the with respect to the that process of dependent origination and the five khandhas and so on, the aspect of consciousness and in the five khandhas, I was saying a few days ago, I feel it's most helpful to not be thinking of it in the way that we use the English word consciousness. More that the vijnana, that's the part of the five khandhas, the Namarupa section, that's really the building blocks of experience. So like Chakku Vijnana, Sota Vijnana, eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, those are the individual sort of neuronal firings of in the visual cortex, the auditory cortex, the taste and smell and somatic cortex and so on. That's the most helpful way of understanding. These are like the pixels of that form the experience of each of the sensory fields. And so it's kind of a different usage of the word consciousness than we generally have in English, where it's that sense of I know, I cognize, I'm aware of this particular thing. I'm awake, I'm conscious. So that not everybody would put it in the same way, but I feel over the years I found actually that's the most helpful way of understanding that usage of the word vijnana. So again, it's not doctrinal, but I found that it makes much more sense to see that all of the five khandhas are talking about the aspects of the objective field. That clarifies things, hopefully.
Yes, and I was just working with my own tendency to conceptualize everything, like in order to stay in the present moment. When I see something now, I just start to, oh, here's the whole theory about why this is and so on, and there's a whole concept behind it. And so I'm almost always 2-3 seconds behind the present moment. And it's always like trying to catch up, but no, I start to conceptualize again. So, and I'm trying to say, okay, watch this conceptualization thing, and I don't know how to call it. Is this consciousness? Is this perception? Or how do you work with this tendency?
Well, that there is a word, manyati, conceiving, which it often refers to the sense of self, but also that creating a conception, like a concept. So manyati is the Pali word, M-A-N, 2 N's with tildes on top, nya, manya, A-T-I, manyati. So that means to conceptualize. So like I was quoting that passage from the suttas, that whereby one is a perceiver of the world and a conceiver of the world. That's lokamani. So that's from the same verb root, a conceiver of the world. The mind is conceiving, making the world into this particular form. So that comes from that root manyati, conceiving, and that. And also I was quoting that passage, yena yena hi manyanti tatatang hoti anyatati. Whatever you conceive it to be, the truth is always other than that. So again, there's manyanti, well, that's the plural. Whatever they conceive it to be, the truth is always other than that. So that exactly what you're describing, the Pali word is manyati, conceiving, conceptualizing. And it's like creating a whole kind of a layer of assumption around things, a kind of a commentary about things, a kind of naming and elaborating about the present experience. So that's all in the field of manyati.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Time for one more. If there are any questions in the room? Yes. And much appreciation to our microphone runner, doing hard work every day.
กราบนมัสการค่ะ Can you explain once again about the Metta Pavana method that you taught yesterday? Because I tried to do this morning, but a bit confused. When I have a feeling in my heart, should I go back to focus on the breath, or should I only concentrate on the feeling that happened?
Well, I'm a great advocate of people experimenting. And so my first thought will be a bit of both. That to both be sustaining the quality of well-wishing, and then using the breath, because the body's still breathing. You don't forget to breathe, right?
Right. Yes.
But the body is still breathing on its own. And so by focusing at the heart center, and then you can, there's some sensation of the lungs expanding and contracting.
I see.
So just using that, the physical sensation of the breath entering and leaving, and also the lungs expanding, contracting, just using that sensation as a focal point. And then, as I was describing that, on the in-breath, may I be well, may I be at ease, and on the out-breath, may all beings be at ease. If it gets too complicated, then make your own simplifications. There's no kind of right way to do it, but I encourage people to try things out, to experiment and see what brings a good result.
It's kind of huge feeling for me, so I cannot go back to focus on my breath. I mean, feeling in my heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, whatever is the way that we find it.
Okay.
It was interesting that I was teaching this many years ago. I was teaching this as a method, and on a meditation retreat, and it had a variety of different effects on the people who are retreating. There were for one person, it had a very, very powerful, liberating effect. She said she was an older woman. She'd lived in India. She'd been a disciple of Sri Ramana Maharshi at Arunachala mountain in the south of India. And she was saying, oh, this practice, this is so powerful. This is just like being in the presence of Sri Ramana Maharshi. It's like, I never thought I'd feel this ever again. I think, okay, well, kind of calm down. But it was kind of amazingly powerful. And she was just so happy. Like, this is amazing. It's incredible. I never thought I'd have that opportunity again. So she was extremely happy with that. And then at the next interview, somebody came in and said, well, I'm really angry with you. You know, this practice has completely ruined me. And I thought, oh, interesting. The complete contrast to the other woman who was having this sort of revisiting Arunachala ashram. And so I said, well, but she had this kind of smile on her face as well. I'm really angry with you, but she was smiling. So, oh, interesting. And so it turned out, she explained, she said, I'm an administrator in a large psychiatric hospital. I have a very demanding life, and often the staff and the doctors are far more challenging than the patients. It's a difficult situation, but I've got really good samadhi. I've been meditating for years and years, so I have this whole big issues of life of the hospital. I come home, I sit down to meditate, and it's all gone. enter my space of samadhi, like going up into my nice brightly lit attic with the skylights and the pure white walls and a white carpet and sky above. He said, "You've ruined that." Oh, interesting. She was also still smiling, telling me the story. I said, so she said, "I've discovered that there's chaos going on in the rest of the house underneath my beautiful attic." That this, by bringing the attention down into the heart, she said, there's all kinds of chaos that the kids are causing in the rest of the house. Well, I've been in my little spiritual bubble in the attic, the psychological attic, that there's all this unfinished business down here in the rest of the house, like the teenagers are causing mayhem, chaos in the house. And so she said, "So I'm really angry with you. You've ruined my meditation." A big smile. But I've told that story many times because it was also, she was kind of grateful too, because she could see that she did have very good samadhi, but she made it into a kind of capsule, a sort of panic room, where she could kind of close everything off and seal herself in this safe place and nothing could get in. And she said, "Well, I was good at doing that. It's good solid walls, but there's all this unfinished business that I was missing, that I wasn't aware of, and that needs attending. So I'm very upset with you, Ajahn." A big smile, and so it was a beginning of a very good friendship, and it was interesting that just by changing literally the physical location, because she tended to focus on the breath in her nostrils, so literally bringing the attention out of the head down into the heart, just that much seemingly had made this big difference in her practice. And so that it wasn't what I was expecting, or the other woman's experience of revisiting Sri Ramana. I wasn't expecting that either. But I do feel it's a very potent and direct way of cultivating metta. And also, so you got it's a kind of non-conceptual, non-verbal way of developing metta. And many kinds of metta practice can get lost in all the words of remembering all the people that you're spreading kindness to, and can be a bit chattery. So it's the physical and non-verbal quality of that I found quite helpful.